In the year 2023, Roselio, a former member of the iconic band Menudo, from which renowned artists like Ricky Martin would emerge, made explosive statements. Statements that not only force us to revisit old stories related to the famous Puerto Rican group, but could end up reopening one of the most publicized homicide cases in the United States. The reason is simple. The former Menudo member reported that when he was underage and preparing for success, a high-ranking official from Radio Corporation of America Records had abused him. This occurred repeatedly, not just a single time. The alleged abuser would be none other than Jose Menendez, whose murder, along with his wife's, made headlines in the 90s. For years, the media had a field day covering the details of this disturbing event. And it's no wonder it had all the ingredients to become the main course of morbid curiosity at that time. First and foremost, it was a murder committed in Beverly Hills, an exclusive private neighborhood. At day's end, it appears not everything that glimmers is truly golden. Second, the culprits of the crime were none other than the businessman's very own sons. Yes, within the internal dynamics of one of those affluent families that seem perfect to the environment, there seemed to be sordid secrets and pending issues. It was, in short, a case that had all the potential to captivate the citizens, and it did. However, the trial, the sentences, and what would happen later would leave a bitter taste. Today, almost 30 years after that final point, and thanks to what Roselio revealed in the documentary Menendez, More Often Boys Betrayed, the case threatens to reopen and present an unexpected twist. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand everything that happened, we need to start from the beginning. Welcome to the dark case of the Menendez brothers. Before we begin, if you're interested in this topic, leave a like. If this video surpasses 7,000 likes, let's get started. The perfect family. Beverly Hills is a city in Los Angeles that has a particularity. It's full of mansions. Seeing the properties that rise there is impressive. We're talking about huge properties with buildings that stand out for their extravagance, good taste, and luxury. As many of you may already know, many entertainment stars live or have lived in the area. But those mansions are not only occupied by great emblems of rock or cinema, they are also occupied by those who are dedicated to art, but are usually behind the scenes. We're talking about prestigious producers and directors, and it's about a person related to this last group that we're going to talk about. In a mansion valued at $5 million, which had previously been rented by figures of the stature of Prince or Elton John, lived Jose Menendez. Jose Menendez was born in Cuba and immigrated to the United States at 16. He quickly became involved with the music world and would crown himself as a renowned executive who came to preside over the record division of Radio Corporation of America Company. His catalog included many men and women who would rise over time with thousands of fans around the world. But perhaps the greatest success achieved by Jose during his years with the company occurred with the aforementioned Menudo, a band formed by teenagers who were between 13 and 16 years old. Founded in 1977, Menudo was born from the hand of producer Edgardo Diaz, who, after being part of the execution of a similar band in Spain, did not hesitate to bring the experience to his native Puerto Rico. What did he expect? A success. What did he get? Much more than that, Menudo would mock out before and after. And when Jose had the chance to get into the business, he didn't waste it. The man was in the project until 1988, time that was more than enough for him to fill his pockets with bills. We could never know how much profit these young people brought to the greedy businessman. But it's clear that it was enough for the man to be able to buy the huge 850 square meter property we were talking about. Jose had also acquired luxury cars and frequently traveled to various parts of the world. He went alone, with partners, and frequently with his family, his wife, Kitty, and two sons, Lyle and Erik Joseph. Lyle. Menendez was born on January 10, 1968, and Erik Galen Menendez on November 27, 1970. From a very young age, both were accustomed to the best schools, exclusive outings, and a world of privileges that sooner rather than later had made them insatiable. Determined that Lyle and Erik could take advantage of the benefits of their position, the parents paid for the best private teachers and introduced them to influential people at a very young age. Generally, when things happen this way, two possible destinations usually appear on the horizon. The child in question makes use of everything he can access, and at a record age, he is already generating as many millions as his parents. In a cutting-edge business, or the... Things get distorted to such an extent that the spoiled child becomes an unscrupulous narcissist who believes he owns everything and dedicates himself to living off the family's monetary wealth. Lyle and Erik undoubtedly belong to the second group, and, just as their parents dreamed, they would end up being famous, but in the most terrible way. Something strange is happening at home. Lyle had been suspended from the prestigious Princeton University for cheating on an exam, while Erik was accumulating remnants from minor thefts in the city of Calabasas. Yes, thefts. Stealing from a person of his economic level. The reason had no reason. They did it simply because of impunity, and because their vices were leading them to a chain that was not going to end. Their recklessness had often gotten them into trouble. And there had been more than a few times when, for not considering the consequences, they had been caught in compromising situations. In fact, it is known today why they had not ended up in jail before. And yes, obviously their last name and money had a lot to do with it. As they grew up, their mother stopped treating them as innocent youngsters who perhaps had a little problem with self-control to show a bit more concern. When the woman realized that this was not a typical rebellious phase that would eventually end, she began telling others that she was uncomfortable with her children's attitude. She went a bit further when she bluntly told her psychiatrist that she was afraid that Lyle and Erik might be sociopaths. It was also known that she kept a shotgun in her closet, but was it out of distrust for those boys she had given birth to and now did not recognize? That's something we'll never know. Jose, however, had a more relaxed stance. It was the end of the 80s, and the man was still fantasizing about signing new and lucrative contracts. He considered himself at the peak of his career, but at the same time he knew he was young. He was sure he was going to leave a huge mark. Of course, he didn't imagine that plan was going to be cut short soon. He was so engrossed in these matters that he often left the mansion's alarm system off, coming and going, leaving doors open absent-mindedly. They even stole a new Mercedes-Benz from him, which he had left running with the keys in it. Some say it was these attitudes of Jose, and not the antics of his children, that had actually awakened Kitty's paranoia, who could no longer sleep at night. What was going through each of their minds? It's not possible to know, although we can assure that at a certain point their thoughts were abruptly cut off. More precisely, on March 20th, 1989, that day, the Cuban-American Jose Menendez and his wife Kitty would be riddled with bullets and fall onto the expensive tiles of their mansion. Erik and Lyle, who were 18 and 21 years old respectively at that time, called the police in desperation. They said they had found the massacre when they returned from watching a movie. The police quickly cordoned off the area just as the media quickly arrived on the scene. And the detectives, are they used to fresh blood in those latitudes? It couldn't be anything other than a matter related to mafias or settling of scores. Many powerful people linked to the Menendez started to be questioned. The last banking movements of the deceased and their agendas were tracked. The autopsies determined that after shooting them in the head, he or the attackers had shot other parts of the body. An attitude that could be linked to a secret message that some criminal groups used to leave. The faces of Jose and Kitty had become unrecognizable, and everyone who visited the scene agreed on its brutality. Had the Menendez died to leave a reminder to someone else? What was going on? Even though the couple's children had an alibi, they did not escape giving a statement. They reiterated their previous statements. On the night of the crime, they watched the 16th James Bond movie Agent 007. It was called License to Kill. Other leaks say that they actually went to see the legendary Batman by Tim Burton. It was never clear. After leaving the theater, they had gone to the family home to find that horrendous bloodbath. Without finding evidence that could discredit what Erik and Lake said, they were let go. It was in vain to try to find security cameras. As we said, it was common knowledge to everyone that Jose was very careless. Within days, the investigators exhausted all leads. Every little detail had led them back to the point of origin or to a dead end. While no one wanted to resign themselves to leaving the case unresolved, there was also a reality that the members of the security force were aware of. Many of the homicides committed against high-profile individuals were usually carried out by professionals who were very good at erasing traces. What happened with Jose and his wife seemed to have these characteristics, and perhaps everything would have ended there, and today we would be talking about a huge unsolved mystery. But then it happened that Erik and Lyle, who had already gotten rid of the accusing eye, were back in the spotlight. A brief review of the family account made it clear that in a few months, the two young men had squandered much of the fortune that their parents used to manage. Had they perhaps made some investments to safeguard the money that now belonged to them by inheritance? The reality is that no, quite the opposite. Erik and Lyle began a raid of exorbitant expenses. Expensive clothes, Rolex, cruise trips, trips around Europe and the Caribbean, dinners at the best places, brand new cars. Far from going through a mourning, the boys seemed to be on cloud nine. At this point, the waters parted. The brothers were said to have always been frivolous and materialistic, that no one should be surprised by their lack of tact in showing respect for their recently murdered parents. Others even argued that those who looked askance were actually guilty of envy. What was wrong with two young people who had been given the opportunity to manage a lot of money, deciding to indulge in pleasure? A third group believed that Erik and Lyle's lack of empathy could not be overlooked, given that it could be a symptom of something bigger and more dangerous. The brothers chose to let everyone draw their own conclusions and fell silent. After all, as it had been proven, no matter what they said, they had no evidence linking them to the murder scene. However, they would end up talking. At a certain point, a psychologist known as Dr. Roselio would enter this story. What this man would say would change the course of events. Night of the murder. Things happen more or less like this. Dr. Roselio used to attend to Erik, who in one session ended up confessing that both he and his brother had been the ones to kill their parents. Why had he said it? Because he felt overwhelmed, or because he was flirting with the limits and seeing how far he could get away with it? The truth is that these words left Dr. Roselio terrified, but also confused with a dilemma. Should he go to the authorities, or should he prioritize his patient's mental health? The dilemma was quickly resolved when, a few hours after Erik had told him all that, he and his brother had returned to his office to let him know that, if he opened his mouth, they were going to finish him off. That threat, which put his life at risk, exempted him from his professional obligations, and it allowed Dr. Roselio to run to the first police station that crossed his path. That's one account of what happened. The other version says that Roselio told everything to his secretary, who was also his lover, and she went to the authorities. From then on, Dr. Roselio became a figure of vital importance to the cause. And the prosecutors quickly surprised the brothers, who were swiftly subdued and taken behind bars. With this new information and a more concrete certainty of the time the murders were carried out, the old leads that had been gathered so far were reviewed. And sooner rather than later, a timeline of events was able to be constructed. According to this new version, after a long day of sailing, Jose and Kitty were in their living room watching a movie. Their children had silently entered and had liquidated them using shotguns that they later discarded somewhere on Mulholland Drive. Immediately afterwards, they had gone to the cinema to make up an alibi. The most skeptical made themselves heard immediately. What if it was all a setup to involve the children of the marriage in something they hadn't done, with the sole purpose of completely ruining an entire family? No matter how much their lawyers wanted to oppose, Erik Lyle was arrested in 1990 in what was the beginning of a long series of legal proceedings. On December 8th of 1992, they were formally charged with the murder of their parents. A trial was approaching that would be a before and after for the case, but also for society as a whole. The trial officially began in 1993 and was one of the first to be televised. What does this mean? That it would end up capturing the attention of tens of millions of viewers who sat in front of their screens daily to take note of what each of the involved parties were saying. Thus, as the days went by, everyone had formed their own opinion of what had happened. But generally there were two theories. The first was held by the prosecution, which based its accusation on the brothers having committed the murder in a premeditated manner. to inherit their parents' estate estimated at $14 million. The other had to do with what Erik and Lyle had said. The young men, despite what many had speculated, immediately assumed that they had been the ones to repeatedly pull the triggers. However, they had an excuse for that. They weren't interested in the money, they had done it as revenge. When questioned, both separately had told the same story. Their father had been abusing them for years, and so they had decided to take his life to preserve their own mental health. Then they had killed their mother for covering up for the man. They even said that Jose had them threatened. He had told them that if he ever found out they reported him, he would find a way to make them disappear from the face of the earth. They were very explicit about how the other one humiliated them, about the things he did and said to them, about how he had managed to manipulate them for years. According to the defense, the fear carried for years had wreaked havoc on the brothers' sanity. Did this make sense? Were there any proofs of what the brothers were saying? Few. Among them, a letter written by Erik Menendez to his cousin Andy Cano stood out. In December of 1988, 8 months before the crime. In that message, Erik confessed, "I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but now it's worse for me. Every night I stay up thinking he could come into my room. I'm scared, he's crazy. He has warned me 100 times not to tell anyone. Especially to Lyle Cano, who suffered an accidental overdose and died in 2003. He testified that Erik, aged 13, told him his father was sexually abusing him and giving him genital massages. But the prosecutors suggested that his testimony lacked credibility. As we mentioned earlier, some jury members believed the brothers, while others remained adhered to the prosecutor's argument. There were so many doubts that there was no way to draw conclusions. On the streets, just like in the courts, some saw the brothers as victims and others as pathological liars. Unable to reach an agreement on the verdict, which ranged from manslaughter to murder, the first trial was declared null. A date for a second trial was quickly set, with the judge making a specific request this time. He didn't want cameras in the courtroom. He believed that the cameras put a lot of pressure on the jury, who felt watched by the citizens who were following the event on television. The judge stated that this pressure compelled them to be less than fully objective, leading to controversies. The request was fulfilled, while the testimonies and evidence that the defense used about the supposedly abusive dynamics of Jose Menendez were restricted. In this second trial, the defense had the same difficulties, without witnesses who could corroborate the physical abuses. They were in a situation that did not favor him. However, the final blow came when the judge ruled out the possibility of ruling involuntary manslaughter based on the alleged abuses. This forced the jury to choose between only two options: convict the defendants of murder or declare them innocent and set them free. These new rules changed the perspectives of the trial and made it so that on April 18, 1996, Lyle and Erik ended up being convicted of murder. The sentence? Life imprisonment with no possibility of parole? The impact was total. Some celebrated, others denied, sure that a huge injustice was being committed, perhaps managed by accomplices of Jose Menendez, who preferred that the past not be stirred up. Another detail to keep in mind: do you remember Dr. Roselio, who became vital for the whole case to be built? Well, in 1997. He lost his psychology license after being accused of violating professional rules and having relationships with female patients. Apparently, it wasn't the first time he leaked sensitive content. His former secretary and lover would later accuse him of being skilled at manipulating and implanting false memories in people. One way or another, after the first week, the matter that had so stirred everyone's passions left the headlines and new news came to replace it. However, Erik and Lyle would not tire of appealing for their freedom, and it would be almost 30 years before they were heard again. And that's how our story comes back to the beginning. While filing appeals and requesting numerous legal resources, the Menendez brothers continued to live in maximum security prisons and built a life behind bars. In January of 1997, Lyle married a pen pal with whom he had been in postal contact for a long time. The marriage reportedly ended in less than a year, precisely after the girl discovered that Lyle was cheating on her with another woman with whom he was also writing to this girl. The third party was Rebecca Sneed, an editor of a magazine. He would marry her in November of 2003 in a ceremony in the visiting area of the maximum security prison of Mule Creek State Prison. Erik got married via telephone ceremony in Folsom State Prison in 1997 at the age of 37. In June of 1999, after serving 28 years, the subject got remarried to Ruth Tammy Sackerman, who was 37 years old, in Folsom State Prison, in a waiting room of the jail. The brothers were only transferred together to the same San Diego penitentiary in 2018, allowing them to share their daily lives. For the first time after such a long time, meeting each other also gave them the chance for their case to start taking unexpected turns. Their lawyer, Cliff Garner, claims to have new evidence that supports his client's versions. Gartner argues that if this evidence had been considered, the Menendez should have been convicted of manslaughter instead of premeditated murder, resulting in a lighter sentence. The defense's trump card is none other than the statement of former Menudo member Roy Roselio, who claimed that at just 15 years old, Jose Menendez and another acclaimed producer gave him alcoholic drinks and then took advantage of him. Roselio's testimony led the lawyer to file a habeas corpus petition in May of 2023, requesting that the convictions be annulled, because they consider these new pieces of evidence to be sufficiently solid and relevant. If this happens, it will be up to the Los Angeles County Prosecutor's Office to decide whether the Menendez brothers should be retried or not. Meanwhile, Lyle and Erik wait in prison. According to what has been revealed, they feel happy and hopeful. They can't wait for people to see them as what they claim to be victims. Will we discover, after all this time, that two individuals who were labeled as monsters actually never lied about the reason for their actions? If true, does this not raise more disturbing questions? Who else knew about Menendez's perverse actions? Who else is behind this disturbing network? What if the now deceased Menendez is discovered to have been a vile pedophile? Isn't it time to start digging more emphatically into the past of all these entertainment industry producers who often work with minors? And even worse, if the minors prove that they were telling the truth all along, doesn't this put us in perspective that there could be thousands of similar cases where the most powerful manage to get those who really shouldn't be there locked up,